Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. What's a small act of kindness you were once shown that you'll never forget? Story 1. Neighbors asked to borrow my truck. Told them I could not trust my truck because the tires were bad. Next day, Mr. Neighbor called and said he was getting new tires for his Suburban, and I could have his old ones. Told me to just show up at the certain tire shop, and they would put them on. Get to tire shop, and they put on brand new Goodyear tires. I asked what happened to the old tires I was supposed to receive. Shop owner said the old tires was just a story to get me in the shop. Mr. Neighbor bought me a full set of new tires instead of the old tires he said I could have. Story 2. Riding my bike on a long trip through Canada. With about 50 miles to go, I had a major mechanical failure. Stuck on the side of the road in a foreign country within 5 minutes. At least 10 cars had stopped to check on me. One guy loaded my bike in the back of his truck and drove me 30 miles to the border where I could catch a ferry back to the US. Amazing kindness and generosity toward a stranger. He just asked that I pay it forward, and to date, I've helped 5 cyclists who were broken down in honor of that promise. Story 3. I was 9 years old, waiting for the school bus in Wisconsin winter. I had a thin coat, no hat or gloves. A woman driving past saw me and stopped, giving me a blanket from the back of her car. It was a long skinny one, so she wrapped it around my head and shoulders like a big scarf. I remember thanking her, but being confused. I told her I didn't know how I would give it back when I was done borrowing it. She hugged me and said not to worry. I still have that blanket. Story 4. Alternator died while I was driving home from university. Engine died as I exited the freeway in the middle of the night, in a not-so-pleasant part of town in the days before cell phones. As I'm pushing my car out of the intersection, a guy in a truck comes up and offers to push my car to my neighborhood a good 3 miles away. He does so, and I'm pulling into my neighborhood. He simply gives a wave and drives off into the night. I never even had a chance to thank him. Story 5. When I was young, 19, I lost my wallet and someone used my license to rack up tickets. It was pretty obvious once courts looked at the location of the tickets and what vehicle was used, the signature, that it wasn't me. I had to go to around 3 courts clearing it up. The third judge was the only one with a problem. He said I had failures to appear since the tickets were ignored. I explained what was happening and how I've been dealing with this, and I came in as soon as I was made aware of the issue. He wanted to put me in jail because he didn't trust I'd be back. He wouldn't look at my paperwork because it was an arraignment. He would only look at it during the trial date. I didn't know what to do, but I had the name of the public defender memorized. I asked if I could talk with her first. He called her in and said, "This young man seems to know you." I quickly explained what was happening and showed her my evidence. She told the judge that if he didn't release me to come back, she'd pay my bail out of her own pocket. He scorned me but released me. I just had to return the next month during the trial date. Story 6. I was out of a job at a time that I had to support my mother. Finally, landed one, but I had to walk back and forth, and I didn't have any shoes that would hold up on the walk or the work. Went to FB and mom asked around for some hand-me-downs we could buy from someone. A day later, a very kind man showed up with a brand new pair of really nice shoes he had just gone out and bought for me. He left before I could even get any money for him. I cried. Story 7. I recorded a homemade album with my garage band in high school and handed out a few CDs. A few weeks later, my English teacher approached me with 5 pages of notes on what he liked and what I could improve on. He apparently got the CD from someone. He didn't know I was the singer and guitar player until he asked the person who gave him the CD. He said that if I ever got a shot in a studio, I would create something amazing. Thank you to all the teachers out there who believe in their students. It makes all the difference to some of us. Story 8. During the single most difficult time of my life, a stranger on Reddit gifted me $500. To me, it was a fortune. I received it while at work and just broke down. It started the change of my life, and a few months later, I was able to move, met my now fiancé, had my son, and found my job. I still message them once in a while to update them on my life and continue to thank them for their generosity. But I think they abandoned their account years ago. Story 9. At work, I was complaining about heartburn once. I was still pretty new to the job. Didn't really have any work friends. Felt like an outsider. My life outside of work was pretty shit as well. The bartender on shift overheard me and ran to a nearby coffee shop to get me a chocolate milk. It definitely made the heartburn go away, but it was such a needlessly kind act. I don't think you'll ever forget it. 2 years later, we're still friends, and she is definitely one of the kindest people I've ever met. Story 10. So, there was this one time in the 1990s. I was helping my brother move from a teaching job after college. This was in the middle of nowhere, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He was driving his little pickup truck pulling a trailer, and I was driving my crappy little Ford station wagon, packed to the gills with his stuff. It was a Sunday. I'm driving along, and my car just dies. No warning, nothing. I coast to a stop on the side of a rural highway and wait for my brother to realize I wasn't behind him anymore and turn around. After about 20 minutes, he finds me, the hood up, and neither one of us knows very much about cars. Soon, though, a man from the house we broke down in front of comes out, takes one look at the engine, and says, "Timing belt." We inquire about getting the car towed the 30 miles to the closest large town, and realize that it was going to be an expensive repair, even if the engine was okay and not ruined. This man, though, he takes a look at the situation, sees two broke kids in their early 20s just trying to get by in life, and he says, "Well, it's Sunday. Nothing's gonna be open. I tell ya what, my next door neighbor is a mechanic. Let's push the car down to my driveway and we'll see what we can do." So that is exactly what we do. His neighbor calls his buddy at the auto parts store, which is closed on a Sunday, who does a favor and gets the parts needed, drives them 30 miles out to the house, and sit around telling stories while the car gets fixed. This man's son, a kid of about 9 or 10, is hanging around. He is extremely bored. There were no kids nearby his age, and he's craving any kind of interaction, even with two guys in their 20s. The kid goes, "Want to see my treehouse?" and points to the woods out back. My brother and I look at each other, shrug, and say, "Sure." We end up spending 2 hours with this kid, helping him build his treehouse. When we are done, we go back to the house and the car is all fixed. My brother and I have maybe $60 in cash on us, combined, and tried to pay the man who did the work, but he refused. He said, "No, you boys were in need of help and I wanted to help. You don't need to pay me. Plus, you kept my son occupied for several hours, which I truly appreciate." He then says, "I want you to do something for me, though. The next time you see someone in need of help, and you have the means, I want you to repay this favor." And that is one of the rules of life I live by, taught to me by a generous man, in the middle of nowhere, who helped me out when I was in a time of need. Story 11. I was bullied a lot as a kid. There were 3 boys in the neighborhood who were always really mean to me. Well, there was a new kid who had just moved in, like half the size of the neighbor boys, and he already had a target on his back because he was very flamboyant. Well, one day the boys were picking on me, and this kid, it was the first time anyone ever stood up for me, and man, he got pissed. He got his ass kicked. I felt terrible, but he was super happy about it afterwards. I wish I remembered his last name. I hope he has an amazing life. Story 12. Leaving a park with my son. Put a hard candy in my mouth. Said something to my son. Candy slipped down my throat. Immediately knew I couldn't get air. Threw the car in park. Left my son wondering WTF. Started flagging down people on street. Guy and his girl stopped. Shit started to go dark. Made universal choking sign. Guy understood. I could tell he wasn't sure what to do, so I guided his hands to correct position. After 4 or so heaves, the candy popped out. I gave him a big hug, and we went our ways. Scariest moment of my life. Not Dean per se, but being in front of my son. Story 13. I was around 6 years old, and went out to ride my bike. My parents were behind me walking, and I was going ahead, and coming back to them every 5 to 10 minutes, but I forgot to turn around and realized I am lost. So I started crying after some unsuccessful attempts to find them. One kind man, probably in his 60s, stopped and asked me multiple questions about what happened and who were my parents. It turned out that he knew my grandpa. He contacted him, got my parents' numbers, and called them. They decided where to meet, and after 20 minutes we were there. I was so happy and relieved and thanked the old man. He lives in the block of flats as my grandpa, and I sometimes help him by carrying the groceries or fixing something in his house. I would never forget this act, because things could have gone wrong for me. Story 14. When I was 10, played Little League. When the team won a game, everyone would go to the dairy barn for an ice cream cone to celebrate. Had a Nazi coach one year who determined that if you didn't play in the game, you didn't get an ice cream. I didn't play one game that we won. I wasn't very good anyway, but still, I went to the dairy barn just to hang with my friends. What I wanted, and I told her that I couldn't have one because I didn't play in the game. She gave me a funny look and went on to the next customer. Later, as we were sitting at the outdoor picnic tables, this same lady came out and gave me a huge ice cream cone. "You're still a winner," she said, and walked away. I still choke up a little when I think about it. Story 15. I went to my college's financial aid office to see if I could qualify for a dorm. I was $50 short. I remember looking at the ground trying not to cry. I had finally gotten the courage up to leave, and I still couldn't do it. The financial aid lady touched my shoulder, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I believe you." It was the first time anyone had flat out said they believed I was being abused. She took out her own credit card and paid the last $50. She went with me to sign the lease and to get the key to my dorm. I stood with the key in my hand and realized I was getting out. I was going to be free. I broke down. She hugged me and told me to pay it forward eventually. I have no idea what her name is, but to the woman at Dixie College who took a chance on me, thank you. I pay it forward by speaking at therapy groups about how to choose not to be a victim and by sponsoring those who are in similar living situations as I was. Story 16. When I was at school, I helped a girl out when she was having a meltdown in the bathroom. A few weeks later, she pretended to be my friend who had been waiting to meet me when I was being followed home by two guys. We never saw each other outside of those two occasions, but I still think about her and hope she's doing okay somewhere out there. Story 17. I was trying to fly internationally for the first time to visit a friend in the UK in spring 2010. You know, that year that the volcano erupted, and you couldn't fly into or out of Europe for quite some time. I rode up to Chicago on the train not knowing if I was going to have a flight or not. It was just all kinds of extra stress on top of the stress of trying to travel internationally for the first time. Ultimately, I didn't get to go. Flight got canceled shortly before boarding. The airline gave me my money back, and I just hopped the train back home. But the flight was still scheduled when I got to O'Hare, so I checked in and went to sit at the gate. Couldn't eat, trying to read with a tear-stained face that most people were ignoring. This older couple came and sat right next to me at a time when the waiting area was pretty much empty and simply began a conversation. Husband and wife trying to get home to Amsterdam had been stranded in the US for days, but came and talked to me. Didn't acknowledge the state my face was in, but they knew anyway. They didn't have to, and it was some very small kindness after a really rough day. Story 18. So once in high school, I ate at a Mexican restaurant and unknowingly threw away my car keys on my tray when I was done eating. I went and asked a worker if he had cleared them off the table, and he said no, but that he had just taken the trash out to the dumpster. I remember going outside and calling my dad to ask if there was a spare, and he told me no. So I went back inside feeling humiliated and about to ask if I could look through the dumpster, only to see that this man had already dug through the dumpster on my behalf and ended up finding my keys for me. He just went above and beyond, and to this day I am so grateful for his help. Story 19. Once, I took the scenic route home through a windy mountain road. A beautiful 30-minute detour around traffic. Great view, windows down, smelling the earth and leaves, amazing drive. No cell reception, just beautiful mountain road. I got a branch stuck under my car. Small car, huge branch. Pulled over in a small pull-out on the side of the road to get it out. The pull-out had a ditch, perpendicular to the road. I rolled too slowly right into it, covered in leaves and overgrown grass. My car was nose down in a tiny ditch, back wheels 3 feet off the ground, but easily got the branch out. Oh man. Then, this big pickup came around the bend and saw me. There was a couple who wanted to help me, but they didn't have anything to tow me out with. Just then, this random moment in time, a person walked their dog by. There are no sidewalks up there, and said, "Hey, I live right here. I'll get chains." He walked to his house, came back in 10 minutes with his large pickup and chains, hooked my car up to both trucks, and they pulled me out. I'd been there all of 15 minutes. In a sparsely populated area, with little to no traffic, car nose down in a ditch, and no cell service. We all inspected the damage, nothing major, but the first couple escorted me off the mountain to make sure I could make it home. Story 20. I transferred in the middle of first grade to a school that did ice cream Fridays where you'd pay like 50 or 75 for whatever kind, and then you'd watch an educational video in the classroom. I was unaware of this when the first Friday rolled around, so I didn't have any change, and neither did the kid next to me. Normally, there would be a few who didn't get ice cream, but this day, we were the only two. So the teacher called the both of us aside and gave us each the change required to have our ice cream. I think the biggest thing was that she didn't do it in front of the other kids, so it looked like we had brought the money all along. It was incredibly kind of her. She was a wonderful teacher outside of that as well. Story 21. I was around 19 years old in my first year of community college. My dad has lost his job and my mom was supported my entire family. We were struggling for a while. I remember being in my night class one day starving. I figured there'd be no dinner, so I told myself, I'll go straight to bed when I get home and not think about being hungry. When I got home after class, there was a giant box of Costco pizza on the kitchen counter. Apparently, one of our neighbors had bought it for us because my dad fixed a part of her fence a few months back. I think it stuck with me because I was so fucking hungry, and b, the chances of her bringing food that night of all nights was insane to me. It might sound so stupid, but I'll never forget it. Story 22. After my dad passed away, my depression kicked into overdrive. I went to the doctor and got a prescription for antidepressants. While I was picking up my prescription, I started crying. When I apologized to the pharmacist for crying like a child, the pharmacist said, "You don't have to apologize. You recognize you have a problem, and you are trying to fix it. That is a brave thing." It changed my perspective on treating my mental illness. Story 23. I missed my train to go home for Christmas from uni due to a crash near the station. I was completely broke and knew I wouldn't be able to afford another ticket. Life just got on top of me knowing I'd have to spend Christmas alone in my shitty student house and not being about to see my granddad, who was in rapidly declining health. I was bawling my eyes out on the platform when a janitor appeared out of a hidden stockroom under a stairwell and brought me some tissues. He found out why I was so upset and said, "Leave it to me." Took me to the customer service desk and got them to reissue me a ticket for the next train home. I was so thankful. I started bawling again, and he went on his way. Then, just before I was about to get my train, he found me on the platform and gave me some snacks and a can of Coke, and it's just the nicest thing anyone's ever done for it. Story 24. Last year, my son and I went to Lowe's to buy his grandpa weed eater and a certain attachment that goes with it. Grandpa is a little older and slower than he used to be, but he does a lot for us. So we wanted to spend a little money to help make his life a little easier. As we get there, there's only one of the attachments left that we wanted. Well, there was a guy there getting it down for another customer. My son looked devastated. He knew how much his grandpa had been wanting this stuff, and we were going to surprise him with it. My son looked at me and quietly said, "That's the last one. What are we going to do for Pa now?" Well, the guy overheard and saw the look on my son's face, so he casually handed it to me and said, "I think Pa needs this more than I do. I'll just get an IOU from the store." It was such a small moment for this guy, but it's one of those things that you witness that will literally help shape my son and his view of the world.